Welcome to Csit 311, Information Security Principles. This is session 3, and we'll be looking at legal, ethical, and professional issues in information security. Once again, I'm Prince Deterring, and I'll be taking you through this session. As an overview, we'll look at the following. We'll look at minimizing liability and reducing risks from electronic and physical threats, and to reduce all losses from legal action. Information security practitioners most thoroughly understand the current legal environment. We want to stay current with laws and regulations and watch for new and emerging issues. Yes, we were talking about information security, but as we have learned from the previous session, that securing information is not just the role of the IT units within the organization, but also the general management. It is then important to realize that you need to know the laws that are governing whatever information that you are holding in your organization, for which reason we need to be abreast with the legal issues concerning the kind of data we are producing, the kind of information we hold on to, and how we pass it around, and also the kind of laws that are governing our environments within which we are operating as a business. As an overview again, we want to be looking at educating management and employers of an organization on their legal and ethical obligations and the proper use of information technology and information security. Then security professionals can also help to keep an organization focused on its primary objectives. We'll use this session as both a reference to the legal aspects of information security and as an aid in planning a professional career. We'll briefly, as an outline, look at the law and ethics in information security. We'll look at international laws and legal bodies. We'll touch on ethics and information security. Then we'll look at some codes of ethics and professional organizations. So chapter 3 of the recommended text principles of information security is the reading that is recommended to give a full view of this session. Upon completion of this, you should be able to describe the functions of and relations among laws, regulations, and professional organizations in information security. You should also be able to differentiate between laws and ethics. You should also be able to identify major national laws that affect the practice of information security, and also be able to explain the role of culture as it appears to ethics in information security. So let's look at the very first aspect that talks about law and ethics in information security. What is law? For general definition, we'll say law simply the rules that manipulate or prohibit certain societal behavior. So there are certain rules that have been put down or accepted generally, which has been documented, and it mandates or prohibits certain behaviors, generally as a definition for law. Now, when we say ethics, we are looking generally as anything that defines a socially accepted behavior becomes an ethic. So when socially within some circle, a certain behavior is acceptable, whatever it is that has brought about that definition is what we call the ethic. Then we want to note that laws carry sanctions of a governing authority, but ethics do not. So you could break an ethic and you might not have any sanctions, but when you break a law, you have to deal with the governing body. Okay, so we'll look at organizational liability and the need for counsel. What's liability? Liability simply is looking at the legal obligation of an entity extending beyond criminal or contract law, which includes legal obligations to make restitution. Of course, restitution would then have to mean to compensate for wrongs committed by an organization or an employee. Okay. Let's jump on to policy versus law. What are policies? Policies simply are the body of expectation that describe acceptable and unacceptable employee behaviors in the workplace. This session covers briefly or basically the laws and the ethics that are involved with regards to how information is to be handled within the organization and its environment. So we're going to be talking about a lot about the laws, the legal procedures, and so on and so forth. We'll look also at the difference between policy and law, where we say ignorance of a policy is an acceptable defense, and so on. Okay, so under policy versus law, this is a criteria for policy enforcement. The first one has to do with the dissemination, how it is distributed, the policy is distributed. The second one has to do with review, how it is read. Then we'll look at comprehension, how we have understood the policy as far as its enforcement is concerned. Thereafter, we'll look at compliance, the agreement that lies therein within that policy. Then we'll look at the uniform enforcement. So we'll jump on to types of law. We'll touch briefly on the types of law that there are without going in depth. So we have civil, we have criminal, we have private, we have public. So we'll move on straight to international laws and legal bodies. Now, when organizations do business on the internet, they do it globally with everybody, not just themselves. And professionals must be sensitive to laws and ethical values of many different cultures and society. It is important to note for an organization that when they are doing business, especially on the internet, with the outside world, the global village, they must understand that every society and culture and country has its own laws. And to be able to do business with them, they must be conforming to those laws in order not to breach any laws of any country or any culture or society. Now, because of political complexes of relationships among nations and difference in culture, there are few international laws relating to privacy and information security. There are so many diverse cultures and relationship among different nations that has made it very difficult to have a totally generalized and accepted policy on relating or laws relating to privacy and information security. Now, these international laws are important but are limited in their enforceability. If you pick the European Council Cyber Crime Convention, for instance, it establishes international task force overseeing internet security functions and standardization of international technology laws. And this is something that the European Council Cybercrime does. They also attempt to improve effectiveness of international investigations into breaches of technology law. They also look at well-received intellectual property rights, and they advocate due to emphasis on copyright infringement prosecution. So you realize here that the European Council Cybercrime seems to be doing a better job of trying to create laws that govern information security. But what they lack is that they lack the realistic provision for enforcement. They seem to have it there, but its enforceability is limited because the laws within the other sectors and nations are not the same as theirs. So they have the laws, but its enforceability is not as much as the law would hope for. Now let's take a look at agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. This was created by the World Trade Organization. The first significant international effort to protect intellectual property rights. This is what is termed as the Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights. Now, this property rights, it outlines requirements for governmental oversight and legislation providing minimum levels of protection for intellectual property. So WTO, World Trade Organization, did their best to try and outline certain requirements which some governments usually would oversee and provide a form of legislature to provide some minimum levels of protection for intellectual property. Also, this agreement covers 5 issues. The first issue is the application of basic principles of trading systems and international intellectual property agreements. The second was to give adequate protection to intellectual property rights. The third was to enforce those rights by countries in their own territories. The fourth is settling intellectual property disputes. Then finally, they looked at traditional agreements while new system is being introduced. So that is for the agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property. Now, there's something known as the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA. The United States' contribution to international efforts to reduce impact of copyright, trademark, and privacy infringement came up with this Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It is a response to something that the European Union directive went about some time back. What it does is that it prohibits, first and foremost, the circumvention of protections and countermeasures. Secondly, it prohibits manufacture and trafficking of devices used to circumvent such protections. Then thirdly, it prohibits altering information attached or embedded in copyright material. So this is what this Digital Millennium Copyright Act is all about. This is an example of one of the contributions that the United States made to international efforts to reduce impact of copyright, trademark, and privacy infringement. Let's take a look now at ethics and information security. Now, many professional groups have explicit rules governing ethical behavior in the workplace. We have IT and IT security. We realize that they do not have binding codes of ethics and so on and so forth. We also realize that professional associations and certification agencies work to establish code of ethics. So here they can prescribe ethical conduct. They do not always have the ability to ban violators from practice in the field. Like was mentioned earlier, if you go against an ethic, you're not usually bound by any governing body to be penalized for it as compared to going against a law and so on and so forth. Now, we have something interesting here that's known as the 10 Commandments of Computer Ethics. The 10 Commandments of Computer Ethics. So we shall run through these ones as quick as we can. The first one says that thou shalt not use a computer to harm other people. So if you have been doing that, you have flouted the first commandment of computer ethics. It says, thou shalt not use a computer to harm other people. The second one says, thou shalt not interfere with other people's computer work, which most of us do. Thou shalt not interfere with other people's computer work. The third commandment says, thou shalt not snoop around in other people's computer files. When someone passes their external drive to you and you are supposed to copy one thing, you find yourself copying all other things which you never agreed to, and so on and so forth. For those of you who have been doing that, excluding myself, because I don't do that, you are breaching the third commandment. The fourth commandment says, thou shalt not use a computer to steal. Those of you who are good at this Sakawa business, thou shalt not use a computer to steal. These are the 10 commandments of computer ethics. The fifth commandment says, thou shalt not use a computer to bear false witness. Those of you who have been contracted to be photoshopping pictures and so on and so forth, it's a breach of this ethic. Thou shalt not use a computer to bear false witness. The Csit says, thou shalt not copy or use proprietary software for which you have not paid. Those of you who are of the act of cloning people's software just to reuse, please, it is against the computer ethics. The seventh says that thou shalt not use other people's computer resources without authorization or proper compensation. When you use someone else's computer resource, please seek authorization or compensate them for it. The 8th says that thou shalt not appropriate other people's intellectual output. The 9th commandment says that thou shalt think about the social consequence of the program you are writing or the system you are designing. Each time you go into designing something or writing a program, you are to be very careful to think about the impacts or the consequence of what you are doing before you go about and do it. Then finally, the 10th commandment of computer ethics says that thou shalt always use a computer in ways that ensure consideration and respect for your fellow humans. Please, at every point in time, make sure that whatever your computer is being used for has considered that your fellow human being is not to be affected or harmed by it in any way. These are the 10 commandments of computer ethics. Now that you know the commandments, let's look at ethical differences across cultures. We agree that cultural differences create difficulty in determining what is and what is not ethical. Like I said, there are so many diverse cultures and societies, nations. What might be good here might not be good for the other person. In some states in the United States, to walk around naked is allowed. In some other states, it's not, and so on and so forth. So it is very difficult to be able to determine what is ethically right or not, because we have so many cultural differences. It is also worth noting that difficulties arise when one's nationality's ethical behavior conflicts with ethics of another national group. So you find yourself probably in a joint project, in a business, and what is accepted where you are is not accepted by the other team in another company, in another nation or another culture. This is a very big issue that arises from cultural differences as far as ethics are concerned. Now, we have scenarios which are grouped into, first and foremost, software license infringement, illicit use, and misuse of corporate resources. Ethical differences across cultures make these very dicey, because what the software license infringement might be in your country might not necessarily apply to another person's country. When we say something has been used illicitly, it may have a different implication from one culture to the other, and so on and so forth. So we realize here that cultures have different views on the scenarios, even within a country. Within a particular nation, the cultures that lie therein even perceive scenarios differently, and this creates a lot of difficulty in being able to determine what is really ethical and what is not. What about ethics and education? The overriding factor in leveling ethical perceptions within a small population is education. You realize here that with all these differences, the best way to come to a resolve is to educate. Once the education goes out there, it is easier for all parties at play to come to an understanding and then a resolve that if that's the case, now that I understand this and that, we can come to an agreement that for an ethic, we shall do this to mean that, and so on and so forth, instead of holding on to our cultures and where we are coming from, which is actually the cause of most of the difficulties that we are having in being able to follow ethics with regard to information and its security. Now, employees must be trained in expected behaviors of an ethical employee, especially in areas of information security. It is worth noting to management of any organization that each time they employ people, aside giving them their job description, that they train them on the ethics of the information security regarding all the data that they shall be handling as employees of the company. If you're an organization and you're not doing that, that is going to pose one of the human errors and failures within your organization. With regards to ethics and education, once more, you would realize that proper ethical training is vital to creating informed, well-prepared, and low-risk system user. When you have employed someone or a user of a system and you have trained them properly, you realize that you have allowed them to pose a very low risk to the failure of a system or the organization that you're running. Now let's look at deterring unethical and illegal behavior. There are three general causes of unethical and illegal behavior. First one is ignorance. When you are ignorant about the thing, more definitely you are going to find yourself in one of these. You will have yourself in a behavior which is unethical or illegal. The other is by accident. You might not have intended to, but your action will accidentally cause you to be found in an unethical behavior or an illegal behavior. Then the third, which is very dubious, is when you have intended to. So you can have someone eliciting an unethical or illegal behavior, 1 by ignorance, 2 by accident, and 3 by intent. It means that they purpose in their heart and their mind that they are going to be unethical or illegal. Now, the best method for preventing an illegal or unethical activity, examples, when you have laws, when you set policies, when you have technical controls, and so on and so forth. So once the person wants to cross the line, it means that the law is there to shape them, to govern them. If there are sanctions, they are applied, and so on and so forth. Now, laws and policies only differ if 3 conditions are present. I'll take that again. Laws and policies, they only differ if 3 conditions are present. What are the conditions? First and foremost, when there's fear of penalty. When it is obvious that there's going to be a penalty and people fear the penalty, laws and policies will be enforceable, no matter the cultural differences. The second thing is the probability of being caught. If you know that in your attempt to be illegal or unethical, you'll be caught, it places a sanction on you. And the third one is the probability of penalty being administered. When you know that once you are caught in that action, that penalty will surely be given to you and there'll be no pardon. It helps to curb unethical and illegal behavior. With that said, let's now look at codes of ethics and professional organizations. Codes of ethics and professional organizations. Several professional organizations have established codes of conduct or ethics. Codes of ethics can have positive effects. Unfortunately, many employers do not encourage joining these professional organizations. The responsibility of security professionals to act ethically and according to policies of employer, professional organizations, and laws of the society is what the idea of codes and ethics of professional organizations is all about. That will be able to have professionals actually act on these codes which they have come to an agreement to. Now, the major IT professional organizations, you have an association such as Association of Computing Machinery, ACM, which was established in 1947, and is the world's first educational and scientific computing society. What they do is that they have code of ethics, which contains reference for protecting information confidentiality, causing no harm, protecting others' privacy, and respecting their intellectual property. So this is the very first of its kind that happened. That's the ACM, the Association of Computing Machinery. After them, so many others have come, and if you're an organization or you own a business, you are mindful to want to, in light of protecting your information or securing your information, adhere to some of these standards of ethics that have been proposed by these organizations. Another major IT professional organization is the International Information Systems Security Certification Consortium Incorporated. They are known as ISC squared. Now, what are they? They are a non-profit organization that focuses on developing and implementing of information security certificates and credentials. You realize that sometimes you download a software or you are installing a software solution and they ask you to agree to certain things. What it means there is that there are certain codes, there are certain laws that you are agreeing that once you are going to run such application on any system in your organization, you are going to adhere to. At any point in time, if it is found out that you have breached any of those, the sanctions that lie there within that document you have clicked I agree to shall be implemented and enforced on you as an individual or an organization. So it is well noting that before you install any software, which most of us do not do, you take time to read carefully those legal documents. Many of us just push the button next to install, which is a very wrong thing to do. You might want to read carefully and be sure you totally agree, and if you are found breaching the contract, you are ready to pay the sanctions that lie within that code. Another is the Systems Administration, Networking and Security Institute, known as SANS. They are a professional organization with a large membership dedicated to protection of information and systems. So like I mentioned, these are just an addition to the organizations who have devoted themselves to make sure that information security and information systems are well protected. We also have one known as Information Security Audit and Control Association. Then we have the ISSA, Information System Security Association. So we've had a brief look at the legalities that lie in. We know that there are certain ethics that govern information security. We also know that we've come across the 10 commandments of computer ethics. We have a brief idea of international organizations who have dedicated themselves, and most of them are non-profit, to make sure that anyone who wants to run any software solution abides by certain rules and regulations, codes and ethics, and they don't breach the laws. We've also come across laws that have been put in place by certain countries like the US and the European community to be able to protect the privacy of the information that is exchanged between companies across countries. We've looked at what laws are, we've seen what ethics are, we've seen that there are types of laws. We have the civil law, criminal law, private, public. We've also realized that there are certain relevant laws that the US in particular have put up to be able to help protect information security. And we looked at all of this under the umbrella of legal, ethical behaviors and sanctions that lie in with regards to information security, so that we are aware that although our focus is information security, we don't operate in isolation, that there are certain laws that as professionals we need to adhere to, and there are certain ethics that we need to make sure that at every point in time we are going to adhere to be able to protect the information that we are trying to so much make sure remains the same. With this, we'll come to the end of the session and hope to see you in the next session. Thank you.